Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. A quick update for you on the Bitcoin situation today. So this is a particularly important chart of Bitcoin. As you can see, here's a weekly chart of Bitcoin. I have to tell you guys, this is by far, in my view, one of the most important and one of the most bullish charts out there. Why? Well, for one thing, have a look at this and you'll see that Bitcoin has done something which you typically see on bullish breakouts. As you can see here, Bitcoin has broken through that falling trend line that you're seeing here, this falling magenta trend line you're seeing here, and it's broken through that trend line. By the way, this breakout was a move we had anticipated it would do, and as a matter of fact, it moved to our target level of 12,000 and eventually pulled back, as you can see here, pulled back to just below the 10K, the sub 10K levels, which we also anticipated it would do. So you can see what it's done so far. It fell down to that key level, the blue line you see there on my chart, the 21 weekly average, and notice what it's done here in the last couple of weeks. In fact, let me just remind you what I said 2 weeks ago. Here it is. As you can see, the Bitcoin dropped back down on this weekly chart. There's a weekly chart of Bitcoin. Notice where it dropped down to, that blue line. That is the weekly 21 moving average. The reason why I use a 21 moving average is because of Fibonacci numbers. I use Fibonacci sequences. And what I'm expecting now on Bitcoin in the short term, I think in the short term, in the next, I think probably the next week or so, we're likely to see a bounce. I think very likely we could see a bounce here on Bitcoin. All right, guys, as I mentioned to you about a couple of weeks ago, I was anticipating a bounce from this level. As a matter of fact, we got that bounce. You can see your short-term bounce on Bitcoin. And listen, I have to tell you guys, in a chart like this, normally when I see a chart like this, the only thing I can conclude from this chart is there's now a very high probability, I would say about an 80, perhaps 75 to 80% probability that a bull market has started. A long-term bull market in Bitcoin has very likely started. Again, let's just remind ourselves the facts. The facts are we have broken through this falling trend line, broken through it, and as a matter of fact, we pulled back to the 21 weekly and held this level. Notice we've held that support. We've held the 21 weekly average and bounced off of it. Okay. Now, in technical analysis, that kind of movement is a very bullish development. Let me just give you an example here on Bitcoin from only a few years ago, back in 2015. In 2015, Bitcoin did a very similar thing. You can see here that Bitcoin broke through its downward trend line. This falling trend line here in 2015 was broken, as you can see right there. I believe that was actually in October of 2015 when it finally broke through that level. And notice what it did. It rallied higher, okay, and it pulled back to where? The 21 weekly moving average. There it is. And as you can see, it held this level beautifully, bounced off, and then pretty much started a long-term bull market. You can see what happened after that. Pretty much soon afterwards, as I'm sure you can recall, Bitcoin then started a multi-year and multi-month bull market. From those levels at the time, Bitcoin at the time was about $300, and it moved significantly higher, of course, towards the 5,000, 10,000, eventually 20,000 levels in the next few years. And by the way, let's just remind ourselves of one key fact, that whenever Bitcoin stays above its 21 weekly moving average, like you see here, that is a very bullish development, a very bullish pattern. Okay, now let's go back to our chart of Bitcoin right now. So Bitcoin has done pretty much what we expected it to do. And guys, I think you'll agree with me that Bitcoin has been actually quite generous to us as well. It's been generous for a number of reasons. After this breakout above the trend line, after this bullish breakout, went to 12,000, it actually came back and gave us that one more chance below the 10,000 level, the sub 10K level, a move which I mentioned to you some months ago back in June. So, you cannot say that Bitcoin has not been generous. I think Bitcoin has been more than generous by giving us another opportunity, again, just below the 10K levels there, the sub 10K levels. Okay, so listen, when I see a pattern like this, when I see a move like this, again, let's just remind ourselves one more time. Again, the pattern we saw in 2015, the breakout from a trend line and then retesting the 21 average. Again, exactly what we've seen so far, a breakout through the trend line, retesting the moving average, 21 weekly average, and holding that level beautifully and then bouncing off that level as we'd expected it would do. So here's the thing. Normally, in a situation like this, 8 times out of 10, I would say, you know what, Bitcoin has bottomed and we're going to move higher. Okay. In fact, in a normal situation, in any normal situation, I would say this is a very bullish chart. This is the start of a major bullish breakout and a long-term bull market. In other words, very likely we potentially bottomed here and we're starting a major uptrend higher. Now, the only reason why I'm hesitant to say that, the only reason why I'm hesitant and cautious about saying that Bitcoin has bottomed here is for one reason and one reason only, which I mentioned to you about a couple of weeks ago, which is the stock market. Yes, that's dastardly the stock market. Unfortunately, so as you can see here, this is the S&P. The problem is, guys, as I mentioned to you now for some time, there is a positive correlation between Bitcoin and the stock markets. So as you can see from this chart, this is Bitcoin and the stock markets. You can see this correlation here between the two of them. And there is as yet no evidence of decoupling. I would like to say to you, look, Bitcoin and the stock market have decoupled, but there is no evidence of that. Now, maybe at some point we'll get a decoupling. But at the present moment, there isn't one. And we've seen in the past how whenever there's a drop in the stock market, it has pulled down Bitcoin with it. For example, this major crash that we had in the stock markets back in March, and these previous pullbacks have put downward pressure on Bitcoin. So at the moment, I have to tell you, I see no evidence that Bitcoin and the stock markets have decoupled. There is still this correlation between the two of them. And that means this, guys. As you know, I'm expecting a major correction, a major retracement on the stock market in the next few weeks and months as we get closer to the US election. And that means only one thing. If the stock market is going to start that major correction, and it might have already started doing that, then that correction in the market could put downward pressure on BTC, on Bitcoin. Which means that even though I would love to tell you right now, even though I would love to say right now, yes, Bitcoin has definitely bottomed, and let me just say that I actually think there's a very high probability already right now that Bitcoin has begun the major bull market. I think the major bull market indications are there. Break of the trend line, pull back to the 21 average, bouncing off the 21 average. All the signs of a bull market are there. The only question is, has the correction on Bitcoin now completed? Have we seen the end of that correction, that pullback on Bitcoin? Have we bottomed here? And I got to tell you guys, the only reason why I'm being cautious and the only reason why I'm being hesitant about saying, yes, we've definitely bottomed is purely because of the stock market. Because as I mentioned before, if the stock market is going to start a major correction, that retracement in the next few weeks and months, that is very likely to put downward pressure, unfortunately, on Bitcoin as well. And it might drag Bitcoin down with it. Now, how much lower could it go? That is something we'll have to wait and see. It might, for example, go back and retest the lows here that it did recently. It might perhaps fall below that level slightly. So the stock market is the only reason why I think we should be cautious about saying, yes, Bitcoin has definitely bottomed here. Because in a normal situation, in any normal situation, I would say, yep, we bottomed here. We've broken out the trend line, pulled back to the 21 average. That's it. I mean, what more do you want? So the only reason why I'm being cautious about calling it a bottom at the moment on Bitcoin is purely because I think the stock market, once it has that correction, it could drag Bitcoin potentially down with it. But look, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this again. As I mentioned to you 2 weeks ago, that if Bitcoin does break through this resistance at 12,000, okay, so that's 12,000. If Bitcoin pushes through above the 12,000 level, which I'm not expecting at the moment, I think that's less likely. But if Bitcoin does push through above 12,000 and stays above that level, then I may have to change my mind and say, you know what, very likely Bitcoin has bottomed here, and we could see significantly higher levels on Bitcoin. But at the present moment, I have to tell you that carries a lower probability simply because of the fact that the stock market could very likely act as some kind of a damper, some kind of a negative pressure on Bitcoin in the next few weeks and months. So very interesting situation here on Bitcoin and the stock markets, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here overall in what appears to be right now a very bullish chart.